Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to learn all about the ISEE. I am Brenna. I'm the Director of Education here at Test Innovators. Our webinar today is, as titled, focused on everything that you need to know about the ISEE. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll send a recording to everyone afterward. Throughout, feel free to type any questions that you have into the Q&A field. If we have time at the end, I'll answer as many of those questions as I can get to. And if there are any we don't get to, I'll also review those after the webinar and respond to everyone who wrote in. I know that we may have several different kinds of people here, parents, students, families, people who work with schools that we work with, administrators at schools, teachers, tutors, many more options. If you have any questions that are specific to your situation, again, please don't hesitate to write in with your question or contact us after this webinar, and we'd be more than happy to answer that. To begin with, let me tell you a little bit about us. We are Test Innovators, the leading test prep platform for the ISEE and the SSAT. We've helped over 80,000 students get into some of the most selective schools in the country. And these are just a few of the schools that students who've used our platform have been admitted to. Based on the years that we have spent helping students prepare for standardized tests, we know a couple things. We know that standardized test taking is a skill that you can master. The ISEE is a test that's different from many of the other tests that students take in school, even other standardized tests. Like all skills, you have to learn and practice in order to improve. Once you've mastered this skill, students are best able to demonstrate all of their knowledge most effectively on the test, which of course is ultimately the goal. Additionally, advances in technology have made it far easier to prepare successfully for the test. Technology allows you to quickly identify strengths and weaknesses, and then it provides the best tools to prepare efficiently and effectively. Those two tenets form the foundation of the tools and resources we've developed to help students prepare for the ISEE, and they also inform the strategies that we'll be sharing with you today in this webinar. A few places that some of these strategies come from are from working with admissions departments, feedback from students in our network of tutors, and also from statistics and admissions information in our system. Some of the most important information that we collect are official ISEE test scores and admissions results. We have compiled all of that data and made it available, and I'll include a link to this resource along with the recording after the webinar is over. The importance of this is that knowing what scores make you a competitive applicant at your target schools is crucial to the preparation process. This is an example of what our school data looks like. If your student is interested in the school, they can see at a glance that scores in the yellow or green bands are considered competitive. Of course, it is very important to note that there are many parts of the application that influence admissions decisions, and this is just one of them, but it gives you a good benchmark of the ISEE scores that we have seen found to make students competitive applicants at any given school. For students who work in the Test Innovators platform, we take it even a step further. Practice test scores are put in the context of target schools so you can quickly see how you compare. So in this example, for the first school on the students list, you can see that the students' practice scores are looking just fine for the verbal and reading sections, but the two math sections could probably use some work. And now, if we take a look at the same student, same scores, but a different school, you can see quickly that their practice scores may not be quite as competitive yet, and they may have some work to do before they take the official test. So let's talk about that preparation process and what that will look like. First today, I'm going to talk you through an overview of all of the ISEE test content, what the test looks like. We'll talk about some test strategies that apply to the whole test, and then we'll go specifically into each section and highlight strategies specific to each of those. That will include talking about the ISEE Essay and why it is important. With that, let's get started. The ISEE generally is a test that's used by schools to assess whether a student is a good fit at their school. And a large piece of that is really how they'll be able to handle the academics. A small piece as well that you may not know is that schools are sometimes looking for some information about how students will fit in socially, which is where the ISEE essay can come in. There are 5 sections of the test: verbal, reading, 2 math sections or quantitative sections, and then the essay. The test can be taken multiple times, and you can take it once in each of the testing seasons, which are April to July, August to November, and December to March. So right now, we are in the last month of this middle testing season, the fall testing season. So our recommendation is, whenever possible, to be able to take the test twice. So to sign up for 2 testing dates. Because you can only take it once in each of them, that means taking the test in November and then potentially being able to take the test again in winter. Signing up for the test at least twice means that the first test date doesn't have so much burden on it. It can serve as a bit of a trial test. If it goes well, that's great, and you can be done. You won't have to worry about it over the holidays. But if there is any room for improvement, that test day isn't your best day, that is still okay, because you have another test date that's set up as an option. Ideally, the strategies that we'll talk about today will help ensure that you go into either or both tests completely confident, knowing what to expect and how to prepare for that test. The ISEE can be taken in 2 different modalities, so 2 different formats. It can be taken on paper or on a computer. In general, the ISEE is usually taken on paper at schools. So it's specific testing dates that they're offered at various local schools by you. And then it can also be taken by appointment at a Prometric testing center. And Prometric testing centers offer the ISEE on computers. It's a very good idea, depending on which place you'll be taking the test, to make sure you do practice in the same format. So if you're taking the test on paper, do some practice tests on paper. If you're going to be doing a Prometric center on a computer, practice a bit on a computer. The different levels of the test are: lower levels for application to grades 5 and 6, middle level for application to grades 7 and 8, upper level grades 9 through 12. Notice that each of those just had a grade range. So students and applying to each of those grades are taking the same test, but scoring is normative according to the grade. So what that means is students are only compared to students their own age. So even though someone applying to 9th grade is taking the same test as someone applying to 12th grade, they're only being compared to other students who are applying to 9th grade. A bit about what the test looks like. For the lower level, you have 127 questions plus the writing prompt or essay prompt. You have 2 hours and 20 minutes in total. For the middle and upper levels of the test, that's 160 questions, a bit longer, and 2 hours and 40 minutes. For both, or all 3 levels, there are 2 breaks offered during the test, and they're roughly 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes for each of those breaks. The structure of the test is you start with the verbal reasoning section, then the quantitative reasoning section, get that short break, then reading comprehension, math achievement, short break, and then you have an essay at the end. So now that you know what the test looks like, let's talk a little bit about coming up with a preparation plan and what that would look like. There are several factors that go into this. This is highly individual, what exactly your preparation plan will look like. Some things that will factor in here are how well you know the material initially, how much time you have to prepare before your official test date, what your current time management skills look like, and how many times you may be taking the official test. Will you be taking it just once? Will you be able to take it twice? What does that look like? We'll focus on talking about strategies that could fall into any time frame. So if you're taking the test soon, or if you're taking the test in a couple months. Regardless of all the answers to those questions on the previous slide, the first step in every preparation process is always to take a full-length practice test or benchmark. That does a couple important things. First of all, no matter how close you are to your official test date, if you are close or far, it gives you familiarity with the test style, difficulty, and content so that you know what to expect. It also allows you to identify strengths and weaknesses so that you know how to focus your time. There's no point spending lots of time answering a type of question that you already know how to answer all of them correctly. Some of the things that you look for in the results of a practice test include identifying if there are concepts that you didn't know, seeing if you managed your time effectively, or if there were sections that you may not have gotten through all the questions on. Do you use elimination strategies, or do you just pick the right answer when you saw that and guess randomly otherwise? Things like this. Since you know that your first step is going to be that full-length practice test, the obvious question is where to find them. You can find full-length practice tests many different places. So Test Innovators, we have some, of course. They're also available some other places, testing centers, other websites. The important thing to keep in mind when you're looking for practice tests and practice materials in general, the most important always is to have accurate, up-to-date tests. One of the benefits to the Test Innovator system, for instance, is that we are online, so we can always update things. We are not stuck with a paper format that is less easy to update according to any changes in the test. So we're constantly making sure that our tests are accurate. Next, it's really helpful to have access to quick normative scoring, to know where you stand as you are going into your preparation process. And timing data is also very helpful, which helps you learn time management skills, which are critical for this test. Here's a look at what our platform does in terms of timing. It shows exactly how a student spent time as they went through a test section. So you can see that they went through all of the questions on the section, and then they went back to the beginning and they checked their work on some of those. Insights like these are critical to help students become effective test takers. Time management is such a big piece of the ISEE because you have to fit answering a lot of fairly difficult questions into a fairly short time frame. So learning how to use that time as effectively as possible is very important. This sort of thing also helps something we think is important, which is fostering a reflective process for learning throughout the process. So with that, let's talk about a couple strategies that apply across the entire test. And the first of those is the guessing strategy. This is, when it comes to the ISEE, very straightforward. There's no wrong answer penalty on the ISEE. You get 1 point for a correct answer. You get 0 points for an incorrect answer. You get 0 points for leaving something blank. There is no reason to leave anything blank. You should always answer every single question. Even with questions that you don't have time to read, you have no idea how to answer, just by guessing on it, you have a 1 in 4. You have a 25% chance of getting it right, and there's no penalty for answering incorrectly. So always answer every single question. If you haven't gotten through a whole section, spend your last minute making sure you bubble something in for every question there. Don't leave anything blank. The second strategy that applies to the entire test is time management. And what this looks like is essentially that you're going to start by, as a student, thinking of questions in 2 categories, easy questions and hard questions. This is very student dependent. What might be an easy question for one student may be a hard question for another student, and vice versa. And easy questions are essentially the questions that you look at. You say, I know how to do this. I can figure out what the answer is, and you can answer it relatively efficiently. The hard questions is everything else. So if there are some words, maybe you're not sure what they mean, you're looking at it, you're saying, okay, I could calculate this, but it's going to take me a while. It might take me 5 minutes. Not a good idea to spend your time doing that when you haven't gotten to all the questions on the section yet. So your first pass through the test, each section, you should only answer those easy questions, the ones you know how to do relatively efficiently, and come back to those hard questions with remaining time at the end. Notice that if you're coming back to hard questions and you haven't bubbled in a random answer, which I would recommend, have a favorite letter of the day for your test. And if you skip a question, just bubble in that letter for it, and then you can always come back and change your answer. Be very careful with your bubble sheet if you do end up skipping any questions. It is far too easy to get off on your bubble sheet and then end up either sending a bubble sheet with the wrong answers selected, which aren't what you meant, or have to spend a lot of precious, valuable time fixing your answers on the bubble sheet. Those are our 2 strategies for across the entire test. So let's delve into each of the sections now. We'll start with the verbal section. The verbal section, for the lower level, there are 34 questions to answer in 20 minutes. Middle and upper levels of the test, you have 40 questions to answer in 20 minutes. This section has 2 types of questions. The first half of the section is synonym questions, and then the second half are sentence completions. And we'll take a look at each of those and talk a little bit about strategies for them. So this is what a synonym question looks like. And this is, again, the first half of the verbal section will be questions like this. You have a single word, it's written in all caps, and then you have to choose the best synonym from among the 4 answer choices. This is about the level you might expect to see on the upper level exam. Your strategy for synonym questions is always to start by covering up the answer choices and coming up with your own answer first. This is the best way to avoid picking tempting wrong answers. There are often answer choices that are related concepts or ideas that have something to do with the original word, but are not actually the core meaning or definition of that word. And for questions like that, having come up with your own answer, be that a synonym, a word, a phrase, a feeling, is the best way to avoid those wrong answers. And then, of course, once you've come up with your own answer, just find the answer choice that's closest to yours. Of course, when you're being asked a lot of questions that give you a word and then you're asked to pick the correct synonym, having a strong vocabulary is extremely helpful. Your preparation strategy here in terms of studying vocabulary is largely dependent on how much time you have before your official test. So if you don't have much time, the best way to spend that time, say if you're taking in a week or two, just practice strategy. So just practice with the words you know, or words that maybe you can break them apart a bit, find parts of it that you might recognize. You maybe heard it somewhere, you know a sentence it might be used in, anything like that. Practice coming up with those things and then picking the closest answer choice. But don't necessarily worry too much about studying vocabulary because it may not be as impactful if you don't have much time. But if you do have more than 2 weeks, say a month, 2 months, something like that, it is a very good idea to practice studying vocabulary, especially if you want to improve in the verbal section at all or with the synonym questions. Make sure that you study vocabulary that's at the appropriate level, and it also can be helpful to learn roots because those can be applied to many different words. The second half of the verbal section are those sentence completions. They look something like this. Essentially, it's a sentence, you have a blank that you need to fill in. In addition to single blank sentence completion, so where we're just putting in one word like this example, the lower level also has what are called phrase sentence completions. So it's a phrase that goes into the blank, and the upper level has 2 blank sentence completions. So it has 2 blanks in there, each of them with 1 word. The strategy for all of those sentence completions is always the same, regardless of whether it's 1 word, a phrase, 2 words that you're putting into the blanks. What you always want to do is start by, of course, reading the sentence. It's a very good idea to underline critical information. And there are sort of 2 types of information you're looking for. You're looking for signal words or clue words, so words that tell you something about the direction of the sentence. So, for instance, if it has words like despite, however, because, things like that that tell you sort of what kind of sentence you're looking at. And also important words about what the sentence actually means, because usually those will give you the clues about what topic you're looking for to fill in the blank. So let's go through this example. After we underline the important information, we're going to, without looking at the answer choices, so same idea as those synonyms, you come up with your own answer, the word that you, or phrase that you think would best fit in the blank, and then pick the closest answer choice. So for this one, I would read through it. I'd say the Komodo dragon does not, and pay a special attention to nots. Those are some of the easiest words to miss across the entire test, whether it's the verbal section or the math section, the reading section. And it always means you pick the opposite answer of what you wanted. So the Komodo dragon does not have a blank sense of hearing, so that's our subject, which is why scientists originally believed the species to be deaf. So if I were to fill in the blank, I might come up with something like maybe they don't have a good sense of hearing. That would be why you would think they might be deaf. Then I look at the answer choices. I say which word is closest to that, and I'd say acute. Some tips for the sentence completion portion of the verbal section. This is generally just a very good place to see improvement through skill practice. So while the synonym section, There are certainly some strategies and ways that you can use things like process of elimination or breaking words apart to improve there. It relies heavily on knowledge and knowledge of vocabulary. Sentence completions largely require a skill. And if students haven't encountered questions like these much prior to the ISEE, learning the strategies makes a big difference. So remember, the same basic strategy as for synonyms, which is to come up with your own answer first, look out for those important words in the sentence, and then, of course, as with everything else about these, the best thing you can do to improve is just to practice. And this would be my recommendation. If you don't have much time and you're working on the verbal section, practice sentence completions more than synonyms. If you have more time to prepare, you can do both of them. But if you have limited time, just focus on this part. With that, let's talk about the two math sections on the ISEE. You have the quantitative reasoning section. So for lower level, that's 38 questions, 35 minutes. Middle and upper, 37 questions and 35 minutes. And then the math achievement section. So for the lower level, that's 30 questions, 30 minutes. Middle and upper, 47 questions and 40 minutes. The subjects that are covered in the ISEE, they always require a strong foundation in arithmetic. Students should be comfortable with addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, with positive and negative integers, fractions, and decimals. If any of that might be a little rusty, that's a very good place to start in terms of reviewing. A lot of questions also will require strong algebra skills. You'll work with variables to solve equations, simplify expressions, solve word problems. There also are questions on geometry, probability, and statistics. The best way to get a sense of the types of questions you can be asked on the ISEE are to take practice tests, and that will also help you determine what you may need to review or study in order to have a good foundation in these subjects and the questions you'd be asked on these sections going into the test. There are obviously two different math sections. What is the difference between them? The quantitative reasoning section involves more problem solving and critical thinking, while the mathematics achievement section is more knowledge-based. That tends to be sort of more conventional school math. The quantitative comparison problems are part of the middle and upper level tests on the ISEE, and I'll talk more about those in just a minute. This is the type of question that you might see in the upper level math achievement. If we take a look at this one for a minute as an example of a strategy that you can use for some of these questions, this question asks, for what value of c is the equation 4 minus c over 2 plus c equals 0 true? Now, one way to approach this question is if you happen to have already seen this in school or know about rational equations, you might know that in order for this equation to be true and for that rational expression to be equal to 0, the numerator must be equal to 0. So if we solve there, we say 4 minus c has to equal 0, which means that c must equal 4, so the correct answer is B. Now, if you hadn't seen something much like this before, how could you approach it? Never hesitate to use the answer choices. One of the great benefits to this test is it's a multiple choice test, and you know that one of the answer choices has to be the correct answer. So if we just work through these in order, let's start by substituting the value in answer choice A into the equation. So we get 4 minus 0 over 2 plus 0, which is equal to 2. So that's not 0, so we know that that can't be the correct answer. Similarly, we know that C can't be correct because that is saying that it's true for all real numbers. And we just found a number for which this wasn't true, so that can't be the right answer. Now, if we try B, which of course we already know is the right answer because we solved it a minute ago. Here we substitute it, we get that it equals 0. If we're really being triple checking our work, we might notice also answer choice D says there are no values that make this true. Well, we just found a value that makes it true, so that can't be the right answer. And we're left with B again. And as I mentioned, you also have quantitative comparison questions in this section for the middle and upper levels. This is what those questions look like. The answer choices are always the same. So answer choice A is always the quantity in column A is greater, B, quantity in column B is greater, C is that they're equal, and D is that the relationship cannot be determined from the information given. Familiarity with this type of question is very important to being successful in the quantitative reasoning sections. Students who haven't practiced or seen this type of question much can be thrown off by the answer choices, especially answer choice D, which seems to bring into question whether or not you can even answer this question. The best way to do this, as with all other questions on the test, is to practice and get comfortable. And usually a good first step is to think about that answer choice D, actually. So we'll talk about that, some strategies here. So the first thing is to determine whether the answer can be found. Can you actually calculate the things in both column A and column B? If you have enough information, then you can eliminate D. If you don't have enough information, say maybe the answer changes depending on what value a variable has, or maybe you're missing the relationship between two values. D is the correct answer if you're missing information like that. Another key thing to remember with these, and also word problems that you see in the quantitative reasoning section as well, is to avoid unnecessary calculations. You always want to save yourself time. The goal here is just to determine whether the two values are the same or if one of them is greater and which one. Since the comparison is the only thing you care about here, you often don't need to do the full calculations of evaluating exactly what each column is equal to. You just have to be able to estimate it well enough to figure out which one is bigger or if they're the same. When it comes to preparing for this section, both of these sections, the quantitative reasoning section and the mathematics achievement section, the first thing that you want to do is familiarize yourself with the test. Again, this is where that first practice test often comes in. Know what to expect, make sure there aren't surprises on the official test, and make sure you know all the types of questions you might be asked, like those quantitative comparison ones. Again, with limited time, the best place to spend your time and effort is in reviewing content. This test can cover any material that you might have seen throughout your entire math career. So it may have been a few years since you've seen some of the subject matter that's in some of these questions. Reviewing those is a good way to make improvement fairly quickly because you're really just brushing up instead of trying to learn an entirely new skill or concept. So reviewing content that you've seen before, but it's been a while. And yes, just quickly in answer to a question that just came in, of course, we'll send the recording over later, so you definitely can watch later. Go ahead and review content that you have seen before and just need to brush up on, and just practice skipping those unknown questions that have things you haven't seen before. Focus your time on questions that you do know how to approach. As far as long-term preparation, if you have a while to prepare for the test, it can be a very good idea to study some of that new content that you might not be familiar with. As always, practice those question types so that you're really comfortable and familiar and can actually get them all right, hopefully, when you get to the official test. One of the most important things when it comes to the math section is to make sure that you're reading carefully. And this one, I think, perhaps cannot be said strongly enough. Reading questions carefully makes a huge difference, and this is important to make sure that you get all the questions you know how to do correct. Some things that you can do to help with this are to underline important words and numbers, to pay attention to the units in a question. If it's asking, gives you information in feet and asks for the answer in inches, make sure that you give the answer in the correct units. If you're having trouble visualizing what's happening in a question, keeping track of what's going on, drawing a picture can really help. And check that you found the correct thing at the end of every question. As after you're done solving, go back and say, was this what I was supposed to find? The 2 seconds it takes to do that is well worth it for the handful of questions you'll find where you say, oh, whoops, I was supposed to find, the apples, and I actually found the oranges. And something that I'm sure every student has heard, which is to write their work down. It is a lot easier to avoid errors by writing things down as opposed to trying to keep everything in your head. Some strategies that are really helpful for questions, especially questions that you may not be sure how to do, is to use estimation whenever possible. This can make it so that you answer questions more efficiently. It means that even if you aren't sure exactly how to calculate the exact answer, you may still be able to narrow it down. Think about if the right answer should be positive or negative, how big it should be. Is it in the thousands, the hundreds? Is it a fraction? Is it a decimal? Use those estimations to eliminate answer choices. You can sometimes work backwards from the answer choices or get clues from the answer choices about what kinds of answers you might be looking for. They can give you extra information. And if it is a question that is involving a lot of variable expressions, sometimes putting a number in for those variables to see how it works is a very helpful way to make a problem more concrete. With that, let's go to the reading section. Quick stats on this one. As always, lower level, you have 25 questions in 25 minutes with 5 passages. Middle and upper, 36 questions in 35 minutes and 6 passages. Time management can be one of the most critical pieces for the reading section for many students because you have to both read passages and answer all of the questions, and the passages often can be fairly long. If you have any trouble reading quickly enough to answer all of the questions, practice skimming the passages to find the most important information. But on the other hand, also know that it's going to be better to get through most of the test, taking your time, answering questions carefully and correctly, than it is to rush through the entire section and end up missing most of the questions. As with everything else, practice and find the balance that works best for you as far as timing so that you can get to as many questions as possible, answering them accurately. Some strategies that are helpful for this section are to always start by identifying the main point. So after you finish reading, come up with what you think the whole point of this passage was. And that will help you with all of the questions. It shapes how you find correct answer choices and eliminate answer choices that aren't in line with a passage. Perhaps the most important strategy for the reading section is to remember that there always has to be a correct answer. And in order for there to always be a correct answer, it has to be in the passage. It relies entirely just on information that is in the reading passages. So if you think that's a correct answer, the information should be right in the passage. And last, similar to what we talked about in terms of the verbal section, think of your own answer before reading answer choices. A couple other specific things to think about with this section are to watch out for extreme answer choices. Words like only, always, never, none, best, worst. These are red flags, usually not indications of the right answer. They can be upon rare occasions because there's never an absolute rule. But generally, the authors of these passages are fairly moderate. So if it looks like there's an extreme claim in an answer choice, when in doubt, cross it out. General answer choices can often be good, especially for general questions, main idea questions. And you want to avoid answer choices that are too specific. They're talking about a detail for something especially like the main idea, again, which should be encapsulating the whole passage. Which brings us to the last section of the test, which is the writing sample of the ISEE, the essay. Here you have one prompt, 30 minutes to write, and it is the only ungraded section of the test, which of course means that it gets a lot of questions. A copy of the ISEE essay is sent to schools along with test scores. Admissions departments use it as an indicator of students' writing ability and also a bit about how they'll fit into the school community academically and personally, thinking about what the student has chosen to write about, what they're focusing on when they're by themselves with no other sort of external factors coming into play. Note that while application essays can be edited extensively by parents, tutors, siblings, friends, the ISEE essay is really a pure sample of a student's writing, and that makes it a very important part of the ISEE as it demonstrates a great deal about a student in terms of what they choose to write about and how well they express those thoughts. Some things to keep in mind as you write your essay. Always start by outlining. Spend 2 to 5 minutes on your outline. This is where you clarify and structure your thoughts so that when you get to writing, you already know what you're going to be writing about. At this point, you're deciding your main idea. that main idea should answer the given essay prompt. And you want to stay on topic through your whole essay. So you'll come up with your main idea. You also should have 2 or 3 points that support that main idea. Those will be the topics of your body paragraphs. You should have good descriptive details and examples for each of those in your body paragraphs. The more anecdotes and stories you can pull from your life, the better. Be as specific as possible. Related to that, express yourself. The point of this essay is for schools to get to know you, learn about you, what you care about, so let them get to know you. Of course, you want to be sure that you are presenting yourself in the best possible light, so generally avoid anything that could possibly be construed negatively by the reader. And last, make sure to edit your essay. Always save a few minutes. Make sure you actually can get through all of this in the allotted time and save time to edit your writing. This is the only time you have for it, and you want it to be as polished as possible. So check mechanics. You want correct spelling, capitalization, punctuation, and grammar. With that, we've now been through a whirlwind of the entire test. So bringing it back to your overall plan at this point, your first step is going to be to take a full-length practice test. From that, you identify strengths and weaknesses. You think about the scores that you're looking for in terms of your target schools. Focus on the content and strategies that are going to be most helpful for you. So think about a lot of the things that we talked about today could be very helpful for you. Practice. Do specific practice questions for those areas you need to work on. And then once you're done with that, take another practice test. Use those as benchmarks along the way to track your progress and to see what you need to be working on next. We are here to help throughout the process. Visit our site, iseepracticetest.com, and don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. We'd be more than happy to help answer those. I'm going to take a look and see if we had any other questions come in. And I think mostly this is just a question about whether you'll be able to review a recording later, which absolutely. We'll put up a recording afterwards. If you have any other questions, I'll just give it a minute here to see if anyone is going to type in a question. And after that, I'll wish you all the best. And it looks like I actually have 2 questions which are on the same topic. So I'll just answer these both at the same time, which are about the information for schools and how we have those sort of score ranges. And these come from a couple places, but primarily they come from collecting, again, student scores and admission results. So basically we have a collection of all of the student test scores. Obviously, this is where that piece comes in about how we don't have all of the pieces of the puzzle. We don't see everything else that happens as part of an application. We don't know what your GPA looks like. We don't know what your teacher recommendations look like. We don't know what your essay was you wrote. But we do know what your test scores are, and we do know whether or not you were then students were accepted, waitlisted, or rejected. Essentially, we aggregate all of that data and we bucket schools roughly according to their competitiveness. So what that means is, again, it's really just sort of a guideline, a good benchmark. It doesn't mean, if a student is on the lower end, it does not mean they can't get in. There are many pieces to the application. And similarly, if you are in the green positive score range, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that you'll get admission, but that is generally sort of where that comes from. And I think that basically answers this question as well, which is, how do you know the general scores of the school you're applying to? I'll send a link to that schools page, so you can certainly take a look and look at any of the schools that you may specifically be interested in. And I have a question about the difficulty of our tests. We take it very seriously for our practice materials, again, to be accurate to the official test. And the way that we do that is a few things. Again, we are collecting information about students' official test scores, we compare that to their practice test scores and make sure that on the whole, those correlate. Obviously, for any given student, it might fluctuate a little bit. They might score higher or lower on the official test. But overall, it correlates. And we also make sure that we have information from, again, everyone that we work with, which includes students and parents directly, tutors and tutoring companies who use us, and schools that use us or work with us. And the information we get from all those people is just constantly to make sure our students are taking the official test as well, that we know exactly what they're asking. And if there's anything that, say, one year a new question type shows up, which happens every once in a while, we make sure we incorporate it into our practice so that the question types and difficulties that students are seeing in our practice materials should be very similar to what students see on test day. Now, of course, there can be significant fluctuation on official tests. So there can be an easier test form on a certain day and a harder test form on a different day. And it is worth noting that we will always focus on making sure students are prepared for the essentially the most difficult level of the test that they could see on that official test day. So depending on the day, a student might get an easier test or a harder test. We want them to be prepared if they happen to get that harder test. And if you look at sort of test scores and how norming looks at each test date, there is definitely variation, which is natural. And the testing bodies make sure that they are norming across all of those. So if there's a harder test or an easier test, they're making sure that they get equalized. So many words to say that yes, the answer is we take this very seriously. We focus on making sure that our materials are accurate. And yes, they should be similar in difficulty, content, style, virtually everything you could possibly think of to the official test. And with that, I think that is all the questions I'm seeing here. Again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any other questions that come up. Good luck to all of you in the preparation process, and don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything we can help with.